Kevin Frankie claims that Jodi Hildebrandt was possessed, and both Jodi and Ruby were sleeping in a room together with the doors locked. Kevin Frankie, the estranged husband of Ruby Frankie, the Utah family vlogger convicted of child abuse, alleged that her business partner Jodi Hildebrandt was possessed and that he became the, quote, resident exorcist during the time they allowed the former life coach to stay in their home. Kevin told cops he got involved with Connections Classroom, Jodi Hildebrandt's improvement program, after being convinced by his wife and friends. At first, he saw the meetings and sessions as a way to strengthen their marriage. However, soon became a much more involved experience than he initially thought. Kevin claims that Jodi called Frankie for help in May 2021 and that they both went to her home because, quote, Ruby was convinced we could intervene and help Jodi. However, Kevin said he didn't want anything to do with it. Jodi then called a bishop and he was, quote, casting out demons and fighting evil spirits. He then suggested that the Frankies bring the licensed therapist home with them. Kevin was not on board with this idea but claimed that Ruby had called him selfish and argued that Jodi had done so much for their family. Kevin said, "The moment she showed up at my house, just the weirdest crap started happening. Lights turning on and off, sounds of people walking in walls, like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and stuff floating around," he said. "It was weird and I hated it." While at their home, Jodi would often go into trances that Kevin pulled her out of, naming himself, quote, resident exorcist. Kevin said the possessions would happen every 4 hours at night, but then they moved to every 2 hours. At one point they occurred every hour at night, he claimed, and then at some point Ruby said, "You know what, I'm just going to start sleeping in there, and if I need you, I'll come down and get you," he said. Kevin says that he found it weird that the two women shared a bed, but that soon Ruby was experiencing the trances of her own. He said, quote, "They'd just go up and lock themselves in a room for 4 to 5 hours, and they'd just come out and they'd all just be in cloud 9. And Ruby would share with me she had this amazing vision," he recalled. Ruby told her husband that she had written down what she saw and God had given them work to do as they were all, quote, part of bringing this stuff to the world. During the interview, Kevin recalled the trances Jodi would get into. He said some of them were about long walks along the beach with Jesus and others were peculiar, such as the pet lion Charles that she believed she had in heaven. However, Kevin vividly remembered the dark side of her visions. There were a lot of satanic ones where when she would go into possession mode, she would talk in different voices, he said. He described the trances as really creepy. The voices would say, "She's ours, we're not letting go, she is Satan's bride." Kevin believed that even if she was faking the possession, Jodi truly believed that Satan wanted her as his bride. He described growing more suspicious of Jodi and her intentions as Ruby Frankie appeared to grow closer to her. He claimed that prompted Ruby Frankie to ask for a separation in July 2022. After he moved out, he told investigators every week turned into, quote, psychological hell. "The only way I would ever get back into my house was I had to get Jodi's approval, because if I didn't get Jodi's approval, I would never get Ruby's approval," he said. "As I'm looking back, I'm realizing there wasn't a solution, and it was, you either had Jodi's approval or you didn't," he said, adding, "She became like the arbiter of truth, the arbiter of forgiveness, God's own mouthpiece." Last year in October, just before Kevin Frankie filed for divorce, his attorney Randy Kester said that the Frankies had been separated at Ruby's directive. He said Kevin did not want to be separated. He wanted to work through concerns as a family. There was never any formal written decree of separate maintenance or separation agreement. The separation was under terms prescribed by Ruby and Jodi Hildebrandt. Now that I've gone through the demon possession of Jodi Hildebrandt, I'd love to hear your opinion on all of this. This is my opinion and my opinion only, but all of them, including Kevin Frankie, are bat crazy. If you saw Kevin's newly released police interview, the first thing he asks is what would happen to his wife after they had just told him his children were in the hospital.
Sometime before 11 o'clock today, we received a phone call from 911 on our dispatch that a 12 to 13-year-old boy was knocking on doors in a neighborhood asking for food and water, that he was severely emaciated, that he had...
What does emaciated mean?
Skinny, scrawny, malnutritioned, not enough food, not enough water to sustain life. So he had...
I'm sorry, what?
He had duct tape on his extremities, on his hands, on his ankles, and those were covering rope burns that were used to tie him down. Take a second and think about what I just said. That's the condition of your son. Given that information, your son was taken to the hospital. A warrant has been applied and granted by the Department of Child and Family Services to remove both Russell and Eve from your wife's care. So no one right now is going to have access to these two children based on their physical condition. Do you understand that?
I understand.
Would you condone that behavior?
Would I condone that behavior?
That's my job. My job is to find out your knowledge of the treatment of these
based on your
precious
description,
children.
no. But again, I don't know the details, or I don't know what's going on. But as you described that sounds
horrible, disgusting. No human being should be treated like that.
Okay.
That's my thoughts. But again, we might be different on that. We're going to sit here for a second, okay? We're going to go out and talk. I'm not saying you're still not free to go. Are you under arrest? Absolutely not. We just have lots of questions that we need to figure out. Lots. Okay?
What's going to happen with my wife? I love my wife.
I don't know. I'm being honest with you. I don't know. Haven't had anything to do with
I don't know if those charges against my wife.
possibly. I think given the circumstances, that's highly appropriate, but again, I don't know your wife. I was hoping to gain some insight from you, but I don't necessarily know that that's something you wanted to,
I trust her.
a road you wanted to travel down with me, so.
And not without legal representation.
Now, in my opinion, they're all evil, including Kevin. If what he says is true, that there was banging and the lights were turning on and off, I can't help but think that Jodi is the one banging on the walls and turning lights off and on. It actually sounds quite scary and creepy, but not in the way that is supernatural. I think Jodi planned this. In my opinion, Jodi could have been a closeted lesbian, and this was a way to get into Ruby's home and her head, and then drive a wedge between her and her husband. Jodi Hildebrandt actually has a long history of isolating husbands from their wives. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being a lesbian, but looking into their religious background and where Jodi stands with same-sex relationships, possession just seems like a convenient way to get into Ruby's home and separate her from her family. Jodi Hildebrandt's niece actually speculated that their relationship might have been something more and that her aunt Jodi may have been, quote, queer. Jessie Hildebrandt, Jodi's niece, said, quote, I thought that since I was a kid that potentially she, Jodi, was queer. She did say something to me when I was living with her that was very strange because I've known I was queer since I was 7. She knew about that and it was very bad and very evil, but then she said something to me. She said something to the effect of, yes, being gay is evil, pleasures of the flesh, yada yada, but if I were to have a sexual relationship with my friends, it would be different because there's deep emotional connection there, and that's different. We were sitting in someone's living room and she said this, and I was just like, what? That's called being gay. What do you think gay relationships are like? They are emotional and deep and connective. Now, I believe that Jodi got really lucky when she met Ruby. She met someone that's just as crazy as her. Because how does it make sense that Ruby was willing to sleep in the bed with a demon-possessed woman, yet she believed her own children were possessed and locked them up and abused them? So why was special treatment given to Jodi and not her own children? Or could it be that she actually didn't believe the whole possession thing and just wanted to be with Jodi? Now, I don't know what the answer is, and frankly, I don't care whether they were in love or not, or even if this was a weird love triangle, and or if Jodi was ever possessed by a demon. There is no excuse for the way they treated these innocent children. As for Kevin Frankie, I am shocked that he would allow a woman who he claims brought in demonic forces into their home, his and Ruby's, separate him from his family. I mean, you mean to tell me that the lights were flickering on and off, and the reason was because Jodi brought something into your home? You believe this, and yet you were convinced to leave behind your family and your children by the same person who was possessed. Most people wouldn't leave their children behind in a haunted house. So what do you think of all of this? I would love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And for now, take care and stay safe.